It has been said that average people want you to stay average. Welcome to the Breaking Average podcast, the podcast designed to challenge you to break the mold that average has on the world. Each episode offers insights directly from those who choose to break average every day. Now, for the latest insights, here are your hosts, Paul Gustafson and Mike Harber.
Welcome to the Breaking Average podcast. My name is Paul Gustafson, and joining me today is my co-host, Mike Harber. Mike, how you doing, man?
Hey, Paul, I am great. It is good to be with you today. I'm excited. I love what we're going to talk about today and who we're going to share it with.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And joining us in studio, we have Rick Morris. Rick, how are you, my friend?
Doing wonderful. Good morning.
Yep. So we're going to continue to mastermind on this topic of breaking average. That is our focus of this podcast. And today, I think it's a very important topic. It's one that's probably not discussed enough. And Mike, tee us up. What's our topic today on Breaking Average podcast?
Well, I'm sure everyone knows by now, Paul, that we are the Breaking Average podcast, formerly known as the Transformational Leader Podcast. But breaking average is what we're all about. We want to talk to leaders who are breaking average, and we want to continue on the conversation of how, as leaders, we can break average in our own world. And we're going to be talking about customer focus today. And you've got an interview that you did with a guy named Steven Anderson, who wrote a book called The Bezos Letters, where he did an interview or did a book about what Jeff Bezos, is it the Bezos or Bezos letters and Amazon?
Depends upon if you're from Arkansas or not.
Yeah. I want to make sure I hit all languages in there. Bezos and Bezos, all nationalities, right? But it's a book around how Amazon grew to be from a garage in Bezos's house to what we know them as today.
Yeah, it was so great just to sit down with Steve. And most people are familiar with Amazon. Most people have bought something from Amazon probably within the last 7 to 30 days for sure. And I think one of the reasons why I buy from Amazon is because they really do care about their customers. Now, are they a perfect company? Probably not, but they're trying. And, I love getting service from companies that really care about customers. And this book, I've got it over here, actually, for those watching the video element of it. So if you're in podcast land, you're missing the video. But here's the book, The Bezos Letters. It's a solid, fantastic book, and we'll highlight a little bit more of it in a few minutes. But Steve Anderson shares some real great takeaways, and the passion that Jeff Bezos, that's how I pronounce it, has centered on this idea of customer obsession or customer focus. And so we'll be getting into that.
Yeah, it's what's interesting, Paul, is here we are in 2020, right? And we've been battling COVID. Amazon's the best business model for social distancing, right? I've been social distance shopping for a long time. As you look literally, this is no lie, the last 2 years, we have done in our home all of our Christmas shopping through Amazon, right? I mean, we don't fight the crowds, we don't go shopping, and not that I'm anti-social, but I'm anti-crowd, especially during that time of year. So it's a great business model for certainly where we're at right now. Joining us also is our friend Rick Morris to get the discussion going along. But let's listen into the interview, Paul, that you did with Steve around the Bezos Letters.
All right. Hey, I'm sitting down with Steve Anderson, a thought leader on technology, risk, productivity, and innovation. It's so great to be with you, Steve, today. And you are, this book that you just published last year, The Bezos Letters, 14 Principles to Grow Your Business Like Amazon. It's been a groundbreaking book for a lot of folks as we've gone through it. And perhaps there's a lot of folks who aren't familiar with it yet, but you guys are going to get a little bit more familiar with this in this interview. But again, I'm sitting down with Steve Anderson. Steve, you've got 340,000 followers on LinkedIn. How did you do that?
Well, Paul, first, thank you for having me. It's great to be able to have a conversation with you. And yeah, the LinkedIn thing literally came out of the blue. And I always chalk it up to, you never know when you're spending those hours and days and weeks building an online presence, who might be watching?
Yeah.
I literally got an email from an editor at LinkedIn. I think this was probably 2013, asking me if I would be interested in joining the initial group of a new program they were putting together called LinkedIn Influencers. And, invitation only. You couldn't ask to be part of it. And I found out later I actually looked at the email and thought it was spam.
Wow.
And then I didn't delete it, but I just kind of let it sit and for a couple days, and I did a little and I figured, I think it's legit. So ended up having a phone conversation and became part of the original 150 group of LinkedIn influencers. And so, that certainly for my LinkedIn presence has given me lots of exposure early on and continues to do so.
Yeah, well, that's great. Congratulations on that. And again, I said I was very impressed with your book, and I'm going to pull it off my shelf right here. Guys, if you haven't had a chance, I'm going to always do a plug already, the Bezos letters. A friend of mine asked a question. He said, hey, what's the one book that's helped you build your business? And I said, I can't answer that question. There's so many books, but if I could go back in time and take a book with me to rebuild my business, it would be this book right here, the Bezos letters. So great work on this. Tell me, before we dive into this idea of breaking average, because you certainly represent and reflect a story of somebody in a business that is breaking average. Tell me a little bit about the research that you went in, that you dove into it. What drew your attention to the letters that Jeff Bezos puts
Sure.
out, the shareholder letters, and your thoughts on that? Just kind of get us started and know how you
Yeah.
got going on this book.
So, again, for those that haven't heard of the book, it is an analysis of Jeff Bezos, at the time, 21 letters to shareholders that he started writing in 1997. And how I got there, I come out of the insurance industry, risk management, right, and all of that kind of stuff. It's just been in my bones for many years. In the last 20 years, I've done a lot with technology and how insurance firms can use it to best leverage customer service and all those kinds of things. And what I became aware of, especially as technology continues to develop so rapidly, is that the biggest risk business face today may actually be not taking enough risk. And so, again, very counterintuitive, but technology is shortening the amount of time business owners, right, have to actually figure out what to do. It used to be you could take a couple of years, some new thing came along, but gosh, today it may take a month or two, or,
Yeah.
to be able to have big impact on your business. And so I began researching businesses that had not taken risk well, and a lot of big names, right, like Blockbuster and Kodak and BlackBerry and Sears and some of those, and those that had Facebook, Google, Netflix, and Amazon, right? Amazon being known for being very inventive and innovative. And so through that, started reading a couple letters, really intrigued by them, and literally sat down over a few days period and read every single letter. At the time there were 20, as a single narrative. And what I realized was that Jeff Bezos had what I call hidden in plain sight, his plan for growing Amazon over that 25 years now since he actually started Amazon.com. And that actually led to a white paper. So I kind of took every letter, did a one-page summary of it, key quotes, key concepts, key ideas, was going to put it in a PDF to give away as a lead gen for people wanting technology, consulting and services. Showed it to my wife. I'm a lovely wife who's been in the book publishing business for many years, and actually her boss, the founder of Morgan James Publishing, who ended up publishing the book, and they both came back immediately and said, this is a book, not a white paper. And so that started about an 18-month process, kind of getting those initial thoughts and concepts into what became the book published the Bezos letters.
Yeah, again, it's an excellent book, and I've got it both in print and Kindle and also Audible. So if you want
Well,
to
I
get,
thank you for your
yeah.
multiple purchases.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, that's just the way that I like to grab a book is I'll grab the Kindle and kind of go through it. And I'm like, okay, this is good. I need that reference on my shelf so that I can point the book out to other people.
Mm,
And then, but the Audible, I always like to have that because it gives me another perspective, especially when the author reads it, as you
yeah,
did.
as I did.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and that was good. And I've noticed though, and I haven't bought the other ones. And what I mean by that is I know there's translations of your book.
Yeah. So, I mean, I keep getting asked, did I expect all of this? And absolutely not. I mean, I became passionate about the topic, but yeah, we've had tremendous foreign interest. It's actually been translated and published in 8 languages. And I think there are probably 4 or 5 more languages over the next couple of months that it will be published. The latest kind of fun is Ukraine.
Wow.
Actually published, translated and published it.
That is phenomenal. That's pretty good. Yeah, and somebody years ago, I'm a technical guy, so I wrote a book on C++, and it got published in English, of course. But then they sent me a Polish version, so I've got one on the shelf. I don't understand a word
A
in it.
word. Well, I have let's see, South Korean,
Yeah.
Korean, South Korea, Japanese, Chinese, simple Chinese, Taiwan, and complex Chinese, China. And so, yeah, all of that is, it's weird looking at that book in a different language. You can't read a word of it.
That's great. No, it's good. It's
Well,
classic.
I have
Hopefully,
no idea how it got translated, but,
yeah, and hopefully they got it right.
hopefully they got it right.
That's good. So just pulling on this book a little bit more, and I know we're going to dive into Breaking Average, but I really want to set the table for it. So the Bezos letters, and certainly I'm going to encourage everybody to go grab this book, read this book, share this book, tell others about it. But there's 14 principles that you kind of map to what we call the Anderson principles, or what you call the Anderson principles as well, which I thought they were fascinating. So what's a couple of those principles that really stand out for you? Certainly that framework I think is good too, right? About tests and build and
Yeah. So what we
accelerate.
ended up doing is, actually realizing there were themes through the letters that Bezos talked about, and kind of to help me categorize the information. I started coming up with these ideas of growth principles. And so really a core concept here is that in order to grow as a business, you need to take risk. So how do you go about doing that? And we grouped the principles into 4 cycles. So really mirroring what happens in a business. Test, right? So brand new, or even if you've been around for 50 years, you're always testing new products, new services, new platforms to figure out, what's next, what are we going to create for the customer, et cetera. And then once you test the idea, you build and find out, okay, is this a big idea or a little idea? And so test, build, now you can accelerate, because now you can kind of put the gas down and really grow. And then that final cycle is scale. So, you've gone through all these other things, but now, frankly, how do you scale and keep that first cycle test, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of, and I tell businesses all the time, your business could be in all of these cycles at certain points. And you could have a division, a different location, all kinds of different ways to be thinking about how this works. And then within that, we have 3 to 4 principles that talk specifically about those cycles. So, again, I'm always asked, what's the most important principle? Well, that's like asking me which of my 7 grandchildren do I love the best, right?
That's a
They're
tough
all
answer.
unique. They're all, important, right? All of those kinds of things. But I will tell you what I have seen resonate with people. And actually the first one in the test cycle, the first principle is called encourage successful failure.
Yeah.
And typically that catches people's attention because you don't normally see the words successful and failure used together.
Yeah.
And the concept here is that Amazon really embodies is that Amazon, according to Jeff Bezos, is the best place for a person to fail. Because at Amazon, they're always experimenting. And Bezos says, if you have an experiment, then you have to think of failure. Because if failure is not an option, then it's not an experiment.
Yeah.
And so really the mindset is not punishing failure, but encouraging it as a means and mechanism to actually invent what is new and needed. And again, the phrase he uses all the time is, we invent on behalf of the customer. And again, I can give you lots of examples of what that looks like. The actual phrase, successful failure, comes from the Apollo 13 movie, Ron Howard's movie. If you remember, Apollo 13, actually in April of 1970, third mission to the moon. About 56 hours into that mission, a oxygen tank in the service module exploded. Obviously, huge issue. Watch the movie again. It's actually 50 years ago in April.
Yeah.
And we all know what happened, right? They got back alive. As Tom Hanks, playing Commander Jim Lovell, steps off the helicopter onto the deck of the Iwo Jima after landing, he narrates that our mission, Apollo 13, became known as NASA's most successful failure. Failure because they never made it to the moon. Success because all three astronauts got back alive. And that phrase just kind of stuck with me really for quite some time now, but especially as I was looking at the necessity of experimenting to invent, and the requirements there.
I love that too. That's one of my favorite principles. And you tee it off with that because it's just a reminder that sometimes we have failures, guys. Sometimes we have failures and we don't learn from it. The best experience is evaluated experience. So if you take time and learn from that failure, there can be something successful out of it. What did you learn from it? You know, Edison didn't invent the filament for the light bulb in one sitting. He had he didn't call them failures, but essentially successful failures, learning what didn't work. And we can do the same thing. So I love that
absolutely.
principle.
And I think, let me say, Paul, that be clear about this. Amazon has an intolerance for incompetence. So this isn't about just throwing something against the wall and seeing what happens. This is intentional, strategic risk-taking. You know, knowing, okay, let's figure out all the ways this could go wrong so we protect the downside, right? We try and prevent it, but knowing we're not going to think of everything up front.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. It ties to one of the conversations that we had just real quick was when we were talking about successful failures. And I really resonate with that because Jim Lovell was a classmate of my dad's at the Naval Academy. So I was living in Brazil. We were in Brazil when that happened and we were trying to get news. There was no Twitter, no Facebook. He was trying to find out how things were. We had found out about the explosion. And so he was trying to get updates from his buddies. So it was such a relief when we heard the news, everything. I was just a young little guy.
Yeah.
But man, that was, that was still something. My dad loved that movie, Ron Howard movie.
Yep. Me too. I watched it again in April. So 50th anniversary. So
yeah. So guys, go watch the Ron Howard movie, Apollo 13, but it's a great story. And I love how you lead with that. So certainly there's a lot of examples of a business and building a business. This isn't just Amazon. These are principles that can be applied to any business. And they're pretty powerful. And it really ties nicely to this concept and this theme that we're talking about tonight about breaking average. So Steve, when you think about breaking average, what story comes to mind? I mean, that's certainly a good one, Apollo 13, but what other stories come to mind? Is there something out of the Amazon story of breaking average that you want to share, or maybe something else?
Well, and I was thinking about that, Paul, and I actually first thought about going to Bezos himself, right? His background, he spent the summers on his grandfather's ranch learning to be self-sufficient out in the middle of nowhere in West Texas, and then, college, and then, think about being a Wall Street analyst, very well-paying job in New York City, comfortable, great future ahead of him, and he sees this statistic that in 1994, the internet was growing at 2,300% per year. Now, for me, that might be like, boy, that's really interesting. For him, it was, I wonder what kind of business could take advantage of that kind of growth. And literally being able and willing to walk away. And what most people don't realize, certainly walk away from a very high paying job, but he also walked away from his year-end bonus, which could have been multiple times his salary. So he was taking a big risk, and then borrowing, money from his parents to get it going, and then being focused on figuring out how the internet is going to impact people. And I believe one of the things that makes him very much not average is his ability to think long term. And again, that's one of the principles, but for Bezos, long-term thinking is multi-generational. And one of the phrases that I started using as I was researching this idea of long-term thinking is, he wants to be a good ancestor, meaning, his great grandchildren will look and say, what he did really helped us. He, stepping on the shoulder of giants, right? I mean, all of that kind of idea, but thinking about that as really a 30-year-old young man, trying to make his way in starting a new business.
Yeah, it's so good. I love that question. Will I be a good ancestor? I mean,
Yeah.
how many of us, that's a question, until I read your book, I've never asked that question.
Yeah. I mean, and you look at Blue Origin, the space company that he founded and has funded its entire life. I mean, the whole reason he's doing that, as he says, is to build the infrastructure so that in the future, and it may be a couple generations, some kid in a college dorm room can start a space company because the infrastructure is already in place. And again, that long-term thinking and willingness to invest years of time, effort, resources to try and make that happen makes him not average.
That's a great point. The long-term thing, it's so easy for us to get focused on the tactical, what's in front of us, and not realize, wait a minute. I love the story you told about where somebody came and said, hey, that's good numbers you had for the last quarter. And you said, well, I'm mapping out the quarter 3 years from now, right? In 2021.
Yeah,
that was pretty
that happened a long time ago.
Yeah. Like, wow. And that's how we should think. Simon Sinek, we studied it in his book as well, The Infinite Game. It maps so nicely to this. This isn't a finite game. This is an infinite game. And that's essentially what you're sharing here in the apply long-term thinking piece.
Yeah.
In fact, I love that whole growth cycle on build. You talk about, this idea. It's kind of an edgy word, obsessing over customers. Most people won't put that in their value statement. Like, hey, let's obsess over customers. That sounds kind of stocky.
It does. It has some kind of negative connotations to it.
Yeah.
And at Amazon, everything starts with the customer.
Yes.
And again, back to that phrase that I just love that he uses, inventing on behalf of the customer.
Exactly.
And the obsession is a very specific term, and he used it in the 1997 letter. The very first letter is where that concept first comes out, but it's thinking about the customer in everything that we do. To the point of, for example, I talked about DoorDash, right? And we don't spend money at Amazon on things that don't improve the customer. We don't spend it on fancy furniture because that doesn't help the customer. And again, that's reinforcing that long-term thinking. It's reinforcing that scale area, right? How do you build culture and communicate that to employees?
Yeah, that's so good. As you were sharing that, another brand kind of popped in my mind, and that's IKEA, because they're not necessarily expensive furniture, but they build because they have that obsession or that passion for their customers to create something that's functional, useful, helpful,
Functionally, yep,
and
exactly.
that's sort of their thing. And in fact, I'm sitting at an IKEA desk right now. But
it,
I
it
digress.
it actually helps being close to one. We are not close to one anymore.
Yeah.
Used to be. Actually, the Potomac one, we did a whole kitchen in our house in Maryland. IKEA cabinets that we got down in
Potomac
whatever
Mills.
that Potomac Mills Mall or something like
Yeah,
that. Is that?
that's just 30 minutes up the road.
Yeah.
That's great. And also on this growth cycle, so obsess over customers, the apply long-term thinking, and this idea of understanding your flywheel, which comes from
Mm.
Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. Can you just speak into that? Because I think that was one of the light bulb moments for the team that I took through. They're like, oh, the flywheel, this is pretty interesting, building that momentum to really execute your business.
Yeah.
So why is that important?
If there's a key at why Amazon has grown to what it is the flywheel that they created in the fall of 2001. The Jim Collins book, Good to Great, and by the way, it's chapter 8. You probably have the book on your shelf. Go back and read it. It's called The Flywheel and the Doom Loop, but it's chapter 8. And Collins was invited to Amazon to spend the day with the senior leadership team, specifically talking about the flywheel. And in that next couple of days, the team actually sketched out Amazon's flywheel. And you can get it on Amazon's website now, right now, on the investor relations site. I put a copy of it in the book. But it is core to what Amazon does today. And in fact, Bezos thought it was so important, he refused to let anybody talk about it outside of Amazon for over 5 years.
Wow.
Because he considered that their secret sauce. So if I had to pick a principle that is most important, it would be this one.
Yeah.
And the problem is, it's actually really hard to understand. What is your flywheel and how to think through what are the components that you need to be pushing in your business to get that flywheel moving. And it's really hard to implement because every component of the flywheel has to work perfectly, or otherwise the whole flywheel falls apart. Right?
Yeah.
So it's not easy. It takes some work. But I think, and I've seen even some small insurance agents, maybe with 10 or 15 employees, sit down and start sketching out this idea. What are the inputs that I need to do in my business in order to keep that growth momentum going? So it is key. I would also recommend Collins. Just recently, I think in last year, 2019, wrote a monograph, what he called a monograph. It's about 45 or 50 pages on just the flywheel, giving some very specific and practical examples of businesses, nonprofits, actually even a elementary school principal who used the flywheel concept to improve students' test scores. So it's not just a business concept, it is a concept that I can apply across all kinds of different organizations.
Yeah, for sure. And I bought that book last year and I was so impressed with it. I bought 4 or 5 copies, gave it out to my pastor and other people. And I said,
Yep.
hey, let's have a conversation on this flywheel thing.
Yeah.
My pastor looked at me
What?
and we're like, flywheel?
What?
You want to check my flywheel? No. Oh, let's talk about our flywheel. And it is a fascinating conversation. And I wish we had more time to dive into it. But you planted the seed here for everybody on this whole concept of understanding the components that make up everybody here. Most folks here are John Maxwell team fans. So they understand the law of momentum. Momentum is best represented by understanding your flywheel, building that out. So it's great. It's a good, you did a great job covering it here on the in the book with
Good.
Amazon. And I just want to echo for everybody else, go check it out. It's good. Steve, we know you did a lot of work, a lot of research on this. And I think that's important for us to understand that to break average, you know, we've got to be students. We got to be students of leadership, and it's important for us to go through that. And would you say you're still a student of leadership?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think studying what others have done that have come before you, and what to emulate and what maybe not to, right?
Yeah.
And in terms of both sides of that. But yeah, actually, you know, for me, you know, learning, well, at my age, I can't imagine stop learning. And, you know, some people kind of, well, will retire and, you know, go into the sunset, and there's just so much more I don't know that I want to. So
yeah, never stop learning. I love that. That's great. So we're getting close to landing the plane on this. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So we've talked about breaking average, and certainly talked about the Bezos letters and Amazon and how they're breaking average. But we just kind of hit some of those ideas of victory. We talked about trust and collaboration. But based on what you've learned to date, and we're continuing to learn, as we just mentioned, what's one tip or challenge that you could share with us to encourage our listeners?
yeah, and I feel like I've got several, but I will try and keep it to one. I think I'll go back to long-term thinking. You know, we tend to be, either through our phones and social media and all of the potential distractions, being so in the moment focused, versus, you know, what can I do to have long-term thinking? I mean, even going back to writing the book, I mean, I had daily writing goals, number of, you know, words, etc., and those build over time to get you to wherever it is that you know, want to be. What are the 1, 2, or 3 most important things you can do today that will move you closer to whatever your goal is for the month or the quarter or the year, and keep those big goals in mind, because you can achieve them. It just will keep that focus day by day to achieve those long-term goals.
Yeah, it's good. Keep those in mind. Keep those in the forefront of your mind. So important. We've been talking about Mark Batterson. He mentions, I don't know, are you familiar with Mark Batterson at all?
I don't think so.
He wrote a book called The Circle Maker.
Oh, I'll have to look it
Draw the
up.
circle. And he brings up this idea of our reticular activating system, that when, you know, and he's a person of faith. So when we pray, we're actually bringing things up in our mind within the reticular activating system. And so now we're more aware of those opportunities that exist. And certainly you could see this in what you wrote about Jeff Bezos, is becoming more aware of the opportunities that we have based on the goals and objectives that we laid out. And that long-term thinking that you just laid out just so beautifully maps with that concept. So that's good.
Great.
Long-term thinking, guys. So good. So Steve, before we let you go, how can we add value to you? I mean, thank you again for your time. Appreciate it. But what can we do to add value to you?
Well, just, you know, if you like the book, talk about it, leave a review to help others find it. You know, we're pleased. And, you know, if you do get the book, be sure to go to thebezosletters.com. There's some additional resources there to help you as you read through the book and internalize and write down some thoughts and ideas that might help you move forward, not just with reading the concepts, but actually start working on implementing them, again, individually or corporately, wherever you happen to be.
That's great. So it's thebezosletters.com, right?
Correct.
Great.
Yep.
Guys, check out Steve's website there. Check out the book, the reference. Make certain that you go to his website as well. Steve, again, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. This has been great.
Paul, appreciate being on. It's a great conversation.
Yep, fantastic. You know, I really enjoyed sitting down with Steve, guys. What a great perspective that he has. And, you know, again, joining Mike and I is Rick. Rick, tell me what your thoughts are. Are you an Amazon guy?
Oh, absolutely. And it for me, it also was around pricing. I like to go and kind of touch and feel, see the products, and I remember, the point where I started going in and looking at the price, and maybe they didn't have an option or something that I was looking for, and I'd look at Amazon and see it for far cheaper, and I was like, no, wait a minute, I don't have to leave. It's going to show up at my doorstep in 2 days. I mean, I think an exclusive Amazon shopper at this point now. I check Amazon first before I go do anything else.
Yeah, it's so good. So we're going to be focusing on one of the topics that are it's highlighted in that book, highlighted in the interview is customer focus. And great insight from Steve on leadership per se, but let's just kind of hone in on this idea of customer focus. What is customer focus? Why is it important? Mike, or Rick, tell me your thoughts first, and Mike, get ready, man. I want to hear your thoughts as well.
I think I think it's really around culture and the perspective of the culture. So for instance, there's a lot of companies that'll say, well, the customer's always right, or we're customer focused, but they really haven't done anything different within their business to focus on the customer. And I had the pleasure, one of my first jobs at 11 years old was working at Disney. But I worked there at 16 on, until about 21 as well. And everything at Disney obviously is focused on a world-class experience, all the way down to the culture, but it's even just the way they structured the organization. So we're not employees, we're cast members. That's what they call us. We're cast members putting on a production, putting on a show. When you're not on Disney property, you're behind the scenes. We're backstage. So you had backstage and on stage, and there's literally that kind of transformation we would even feel personally as you were walking on stage to essentially be ready to wow the customer. And so everything was really focused on production, all the words that they used, but also they had a policy. Everybody went by their first name. So there was even when I was there, was Michael Eisner was the CIO. You didn't say Mr. Eisner or hello, sir. You called Mike. And if somebody actually said Mr. Eisner, he would correct them and say, no, I'm Mike. And it was just the culture of the organization. When I left Disney, though, I got into restaurants, and I was able to do kind of a compare and contrast. So a lot of us have the experience of eating out in a restaurant, and there's this expectation that service equals 15%. That's both the server and the patron, right? That most people understand that 15% is kind of a tip, and then people do different ratings based on that. But I always reminded, I got into training for servers, and one of my big speeches I would give them is it's not just the service that you're giving them today, right? It's not just this one opportunity to wow them, but you're going up against every time they've ever eaten out anywhere else and the servers that serve them. So what are you going to do if you want to exceed expectations and go beyond the 15%? It's not just the normal experience. You've got to come up with ways to really exceed expectations for that customer if you want to make more money in the restaurant industry. And so constantly, I was making 4 and 5 times the amount of some of the little reasons, but I'm going to save some of those stories for when we get into our how do we transfer.
Yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I love this idea. I'm kind of a nut when it comes to customer service because I think it's vital. It's very important, and nothing pains me more when I go somewhere and someone that is supposed to be serving me says I'm just right. I'm just a housekeeper. I'm just a nurse, or I'm just this. And so where I want to take this conversation, Paul, is kind of where Rick was going, but is really to this idea of leadership, right? I mean, leaders determine how the employees treat customers. And so in a Breaking Average podcast, we talk a lot about leadership and how we can break average as a leader. And as leaders, we all have customers, and those customers aren't external, they're internal, right? It's those that we lead, those employees that we have. They're our most important customer. I love what Richard Branson said. And I'll just read this to you, Paul. He said, it sort of should go without saying, and it's surprising that it still doesn't go without saying at some companies. If the person who works at your company is 100% proud of the job they're doing, if you give them the tools to do a good job, they're proud of the brand, If they were looked after, if they were treated well, then they're going to be smiling. They're going to be happy, and therefore the customer will have a nice experience. If the person who's working for your company is not given the right tools, is not looked after, is not appreciated, then they're not going to do things with a smile. Therefore, the customer will be treated in a way that they won't want to come back for more. And I just think that boils up what customer service is, right? Or leadership. And as leaders, if we want to provide better customer service, then we have to realize our number one customer is those that we lead. It's our employees, because they're going to be the front end of customer service. And Rick talked about this with Disney, and it began with the CEO wanting to be called by his first name. Now, Rick, I want you to call me Mr. Harbor, not Mike, but Michael Eisner, he wanted to be called Mike, right? And that opened up for a friendly environment. Everybody's on, I have a company I work with, the CEO, I love, he teaches this. I've sat in on his orientation. He says, equal value, different role, right? So everybody in the organization has equal value, whether you're a housekeeper or a physician within that organization, because this is a healthcare organization. This is what the CEO says. We all have equal value, different role. Yes, I'm the CEO, but call me by my first name. You have just as much value here as I do. I just have a different role. And I think that's the essence of customer service, Paul. It begins with leadership.
Love that take. Writing all sorts of notes here. Equal value, different role. That's good, guys. Tweet that today. Wow, fantastic. And I love how you're sharing this, because the role of the leader is to make connections with the employees. I don't think of employees as employees. I think of them as contributors. Mm. And when we think of them as contributors, that means that they are contributing. And so it changes the whole mindset. And when an employee feels like a contributor, boy, that's a huge thing. When a customer feels like they are listened to, that's a huge thing too. And so it all ties together. It's really about delighting the customer. And I like the point that you made, Mike, is that there are external customers, but there are internal customers too. And if we have that mindset of delighting the customer, man, we're going to go far. We're going to make an impact. Certainly Amazon has done that. One of the things that's not necessarily highlighted in the Bezos letters, but it's a great book, as I mentioned earlier. But I was reading a couple years ago that Jeff Bezos, when he has a meeting, he'll bring in an extra chair in the room. And he reminds people that, like, Jeff or Mr. Bezos, I don't know if they say Jeff or Mr. Bezos, I don't know. There's only 6 of us, and you got 7 chairs in here. Oh, no, there's 7 of us. No, there's only six of us. No, there's 7. That 7th chair, that's the customer. And we always have to remember the customer when we have our meetings. And I love that take. I think it's so important for us to realize, who are we serving? What are we doing? And there's a lot of Amazon leadership principles shared in this book, and the most important one that he highlights, and again, they're all really, really good, so I'm not trying to dismiss any of the other ones, but is this customer focus attitude. Amazon builds what they build with the mindset of the customer, right? The empty chair in the room. They build what they build with the mindset of the customer. What if we did the same thing? Wow, that would be pretty amazing. And he said, Steve, he shared this. He said that they build by making sure everything they invest in is based on what customers actually want. So how do you get there? And we're going to be talking about how we transfer this thing here in just a few minutes. But, just to tee it up, though, let me just kind of tee it up. I'm going to ask you guys how we teach and transfer here in a second. But for Amazon, they make it a point to obsess over customers. And he's pulling from Jeff Bezos' own notes, 1998. This is a letter that he writes to shareholders. You guys got to get this. This is powerful. He says, I constantly remind our employees to be afraid to wake up every moment or every morning terrified. Now that doesn't sound great, right? But read on. Here's what he says next. To be terrified, not of our competition, but of our customers. Our customers have made our business what it is. They're the ones with whom we have a relationship, and they are the ones to whom we owe a great obligation. And we consider them to be loyal to us right up until the second that someone else offers them a better service. And so he's making a point here. We are who we are because of our customers. And I think that's probably true of any business. You know, you got to think about who your customers are, internal and external. So let's just go a little bit further, guys. I'm really curious. How do we teach and transfer this idea of customer focus to others, to other leaders, to our contributors? What are some ways to do that? Rick, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and again, I'm going to come back to the restaurant experience for a moment, because if we look at the perspective, we all had the same opportunity. So we all had 15 to 20 tables a night. We had the same chefs in the same restaurant on the same evening with the same kind of feeling that people were coming through. So what would drive that consistent 4 to 5x result that I was getting in terms of tips was only the customer experience. And that's where it really was ingrained into me, was if I really, really focus and take care of the customers that I'm serving, then they're going to take care of me. And it was really about how you made that customer feel. Where it really hit me the biggest was I was opening up a Chili's. I was an on-the-road trainer for Chili's. And prior to that, I had worked at Bennigan's in Orlando. And so I just finished giving the speech to a group of servers that I was training. And so that night I'm working, and this gentleman came up to me during the shift, and he goes, "Oh my God, Remo." And I went by Remo when I was serving tables. And I was like, "Yes, sir." And I couldn't recall him. He's like, "What are you doing in South Carolina?" I said, "Well, I'm here, helping this Chili's open up." And he goes, "My family and I used to just sit exclusively in your section in Bennigan's when we went on vacation in Orlando." He goes, "I'm going to bring the family tomorrow." And when he brought the kids, I remembered the kids, and I actually remembered the whole story right out of the gate. But we were on a very long wait. We were having issues with getting food out to the tables. This is in Orlando. And so to entertain the kids who had been at Disney all day, I brought out some plates, some ketchup, and some French fries, and we made ketchup paintings together while we waited on the food. So instead of most servers were just kind of avoiding their tables and hoping the food would come out and people were getting angry, I was having fun. And then I ended up having a competition with my 3 tables, and we just had a ball. And he brought in pictures of the plate of the paintings that his daughters did. And when his daughters came in, they were older, but they were happy. And I felt amazing. I couldn't believe that one night for one dinner, I had an impact that they would even remember my name and face 3 years later. And that has been an experience that I've transferred in everything I do is what's that next step that we can take? So, even just something silly like drawing ketchup stick animals in a plate. Really just is that extra mile that people would go. And it was so weird, though, that everybody thought I put that guy in as a plant. They're like, "No way, this is a true story," right? And so everybody in South Carolina was like, "Oh, you paid some guy to come in and say that," but the pictures were the proof. So that's what I think about when transferring is, think about the one thing you can do to go above and beyond that customer experience that everybody else does not do, and that's how you get that long-term return.
So good. I love it. How about you, Mike? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, what I love, Paul, is the more we are together on the Breaking Average podcast, the more I learn about Rick Morris. I'll find an opportunity to use that nickname more often.
Me too, Remo.
So look, that was my nickname in high school and college, but I had to retire it because I named my son Remo. So that was a way to name him after me without doing Rick Jr. And so I had to agree never to be called Remo again because it becomes confusing. So I transferred the name to my son.
You see how he tried to take that away from us, Paul? He just
he put it out there for the world. So I mean, any of us can use it. So Remo. So we got Harmer, Remo, and Gus.
Yeah. There it is.
There we go. I love talking about customer focus and to transfer this mindset to others. I think the leader must make this a priority, Paul. Priority number 1 really is about creating an environment of excellence. And, I love Rick's stories around Disney because they're known for their excellence in customer service, right? Making people feel great. And it requires regular discussions around this topic. I think that as leaders, the leader, in order to transfer this mindset, because not everyone here's what happens is people come into the workplace and they're raised differently, right? They have different environments and conditioning and values. And so as a leader, we have to make sure that we are talking about customer service, talking about what it looks like, talking about how we treat other people. So regular discussions around that topic, regular discussions around the values of the organization. That's what Disney has done so well, right? The whole idea of cast members and Rick, I can't remember what they call the customer, but it's not customer, right? It's
guest.
yeah, guest, and making them feel like a guest in this place, right? And so regular conversations around the values and how we live those out. How do we show up? And then modeling is a must. And then treating our customers as if they were a family member. This is one of the things that I do a lot in healthcare is when I talk about customer services, I try to put every person I'm working with teaching this idea of customer service as if that was your child or your parent or your spouse or your sibling that's coming in. How would you want them to be treated? Accountability and individual ownership is key. And I love the idea, Rick, you may be able to tell us more about this, but Disney's policy of anyone can say yes, right? Everyone can say yes. So if the customer comes with a problem, every employee is empowered to say yes to solving that. They don't have to say, well, let me go ask my boss or let me go find out. They can say yes, and they give them a gift of some sort to try to solve that problem right at the point of service.
Absolutely. It's an ingrained. So you actually go through, when you're hired at Disney, you go through something called traditions. And they take you all the way back to the founding of the company, and it's a couple of weeks, and it's all just culture training and understanding the history of how we got here, and what the expectation of is, and they make it a little bit tough. I remember one of the key things was they would show us a waiting list of all the people who wanted our jobs. And that was the only time I ever saw a real strong arm tactic, but that was right in the beginning that says, if you don't feel like you can commit to this, if you don't feel like you're the right person to do this, then that's okay. We've got plenty more people that want to fill your seat. But if you accept this, then this is the way it's going to be. There's thousands of stories that I've heard of just somebody, and not only that, they recognize that within the culture. We would get a newsletter of people who went above and beyond in saying yes to that customer and what that did for the guest of Disney. So not only do they believe in it, but they'd also praise it when it occurred.
Yeah, I just think that's a great policy, for leaders to implement is empowering every employee with the opportunity to solve that customer issue right on the front end. And so many companies miss that. Paul, what about you?
Yeah, this is such a fascinating conversation. I always enjoy it. I'm writing notes again, and Disney, I mean, we can learn a lot from Disney. And as I was thinking about it, Walt Disney, I know a little bit about his history there, and he was really, I think his success came because he had empathy. He realized the opportunities that are there. So I think it starts with empathy, doesn't it? To understand the customer and teach others to understand the customer. We have to show the importance of having empathy for others. And I think of Ritz-Carlton. I think of so many great examples of businesses, the successful ones, the Chick-fil-A's of the world, right? What's the common denominator across all the greats? It's this idea of empathy. And Brene Brown, she talks about empathy. She nailed it. I think it's so important for us as leaders to make sure we have empathy, and we can teach and transfer this, but it starts with us. Again, we say this often, right? If we're going to teach and transfer it, you got to make sure you have it yourself. When you have empathy, then you put yourself in the shoes of those around you, those that you serve, the contributors, the customers, and then you can begin to see and know what problems they're facing. And that's important because we want to understand what's going on. We want to know about the empty chair in the room. What are they thinking, right? Again, the empty chair represents the customer in Amazon's world. And empathy allows a leader to have focus on understanding the wants and needs of customers. And Steve Anderson shares it this way. He says that's so important because that's you got to have that often even before the customers themselves know what it is that they want. Henry Ford figured it out, what people wanted. He said, if I gave them what they said they wanted, it'd be just a faster horse. He said, but I know what they really wanted was a vehicle that could get them to A to B much faster. and certainly we're living in a world where we can experience the joy of that invention. That invention was because of an empathetic view of the world. And so we have that opportunity. Inventions happen through that process. So I would say this: be customer focused. You can teach that, you can transfer that, focus on delighting the customer. And then that allows your team of contributors to be solution focused rather than problem focused. And I think that's important, because the companies that don't get it, that lose their customers, it's because they're dealing with problems, not offering solutions. And the Heath brothers, one of them, they wrote a book recently called Upstream. I love that idea of getting upstream. Can you get upstream rather than dealing with all the challenges that happen when you get downstream, and all the things that you didn't fix on the front end, and just trying to patch things together and band-aid it together? Get upstream for your customers, solve problems before they happen. So that's really my view on this thing. It is so powerful. Another book I read is called How Not to Lose a Customer Ever Again. And I forget the exact title of that. And he talks about the roadmap of that customer. It fits very much what we're talking about this morning. And so important for us guys to be able to transfer and teach that concept to others. Hey, I want to invite our listeners with you. If you've got a thought or an idea that you want to share, a topic that you want us to cover, maybe a little deeper discussion on this whole idea of customer focus, that's great. But we also are interested in leaders who are making an impact, who understand the customers, who are offering solutions that are out there. So just let us know. Just go to the breakingaveragepodcast.com website, click leader, and just let us know about that leader. We would love to interview them, know more about their story. And we learn a lot from leaders who are making an impact, who are breaking average. And this is a big part of it. Breaking average is really centered on this customer focus. So, guys, we're ready for a tip and challenge. It's hard to believe we're coming to the end of another podcast. Rick, it's been fantastic to have you here today. Any final thoughts, a closeout tip and challenge for yourself that you want to share?
Yeah, the biggest thing to do, I think, is to make sure that you understand the customer journey through whatever it is that you do. If you haven't done a customer journey map, then you don't know where the areas are of not only exceeding expectations, but what the normal expectations are. I think a lot of people put processes and policies in place based on problems, as you said, and that creates a really confusing journey. So if you've ever had that customer service experience where you got routed to 19 different departments, and you got hung up on, and you had to repeat the information every time you went through it, that it just makes for a very frustrating experience. So I challenge everybody, especially if you're a leader of the company, to go through the process as a customer so you can experience it yourself and understand what's happening.
That's so good. I like that. Again, I'm writing notes down. I love it. Mike, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love, Paul, you brought some, I love the quote you brought in from Henry Ford about the horse, just a faster horse. Just a customer experience that I recently had. I bought some new AirPod Pros earbuds. And, what I wanted, I had been using, so I've got all kinds of different little earphones and like the ones I have on now that you bought me, Paul. This headset is fantastic, but at the gym I had these wired. They were Bluetooth, but they were wired so that the wire go from ear to ear. And when I'm working out, they'd get hung on my shirt, or they were magnetic, so they would stick to the bar and pull out of my ear or something at times. And so I was getting tired of that, and I wanted just something. I see all these people with earbuds, earbuds that were sticking in their ears. So I bought me a pair of AirPod Pros, and all I wanted was something easy that didn't have a cord to it, but the sound quality in those things are amazing, right? And so that reminded me when you said, I just wanted some wireless earbuds, but what I got, Apple knew what I wanted. I wanted great sound quality where I could not hear anything else around me. I could just focus on my workout, focus on the sound that was coming through those things. It was incredible. They knew what I wanted before I even knew it. So our tip and challenge, Paul, is know the platinum rule. Treat everyone the way they want to be treated. This is better than the golden rule. You know, we all know the golden rule, treat people as you want to be treated, but the platinum rule is treat others the way they want to be treated. And that's the essence of knowing what the customer wants before they even know it, right? Treat them the way they want to be treated, and even better than that. And the challenge is this: measure your current customer satisfaction, but then decide to up level it, take it to loyalty. What do I mean by that, Paul? Well, satisfaction is when I'm hungry, I want a hamburger, and maybe McDonald's satisfies that hunger. But if there's a long line, I'm going to go to Burger King or Wendy's or some other hamburger joint, right, to get a hamburger. But a loyal customer will always go to the same restaurant, right? A loyal customer, like when people really want to have a great family vacation where there's rides and entertainment, they're going to Disney. They're not going to Six Flags. Now, Six Flags would satisfy, but loyalty, I mean, I know people, I've got friends right here in my own neighborhood where I live. Every year they go to Disney. Well, at least they did before COVID, right? But they're so loyal to the Disney brand that they go back every year. So loyalty means that they'll keep coming even when the line is long. That's what customer loyalty is. That's my tip and challenge, Paul. How about you?
Wow, I love it. Good stuff. The platinum rule, love that. Loyalty. So, I like this question. What do your customers really want? What do your customers really want? So I'd start the tip with that. Think about that question. And Steve Anderson in his book in an interview, he says, don't confuse products and services. Don't let that be the confusion. The features are not the means to delight customers. It's not about features, right? It's about the benefits. It's about the why. It's about solving something that maybe adds value to them, right? What adds value to them? Mike just shared a great story on the AirPods, right? Henry Ford, with the Model T, in terms of just the production of that vehicle. If he hadn't come up with that, it would have been years before they would have been able to produce a vehicle that they could put in the common man's hands, right? And be able to drive that. So the challenge is this: ask yourself and your team these questions. And I got this from the book from Steve. And these are great questions. So no matter where you're at, no matter what business you're in, these are fantastic questions. You can ask your team, ask yourself, ask others around you these questions. Who is the customer? Number one, who is the customer? Think about them. It's the empty chair in the room. Think about them. What is the customer problem or opportunity? What is the customer problem or opportunity? We talked about empathy before. What is the most important customer benefit? Not benefits, plural, singular. We're talking about benefit. What would be when we offer them something, what would be the greatest benefit to them? What's the value proposition, essentially? That's the question. And then how do you know what the customer needs? Think about that, making sure, just check that box. Are you sure? Is that really what they need? Is there something more? What is it? What is it that they need? And then finally, what does the customer experience look like? And I love that final question because we've got to think about that customer experience. It's the Disney kind of experience. It's the Apple Store experience when you walk in there. What is that customer experience like? Because that's important. And final point from Steve Anderson, he says, when a customer feels understood and respected, they're more likely to return to buy more. It goes back to the comment Mike just made about loyalty. And I love that statement. So yeah, that's my tip and challenge.
That's so good, Paul. Love it. Hey, we want to thank our sponsor for today's show, R2 Consulting LLC. Rick Morris, Remo, he's the leader of that company. He's not only our studio guest, but the sponsor of today's episode. R2 is in the business of enabling the value of project management. And if you have a dream and need someone to help you make that dream come true, then give Rick and R2 Consulting a call. Let his team serve you. You can also visit them at www.rsquaredconsulting.com. That's RSQUARED consulting.com. And Rick, we thank you for your sponsorship.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Rick. And great conversation today, Mike and Rick. I've really enjoyed this whole thing on customer focus. I think it's important. It's a great topic, and we need to continue to drive through that, understanding the needs of that customer, because we want to add value to other people. Guys, I'm inspired by our mission of leadership and breaking average. Thank you for being a part of this podcast, and thank you, listeners, for being a part of our podcast and just sharing your thoughts and ideas. Just go to breakingaveragepodcast.com and continue to follow us there. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Breaking Average podcast. If you loved what you heard, please take a moment to subscribe. All opinions and comments expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and do not reflect the opinions or views of any of the advertisers, producers, or platforms. This show was produced by R2 Multimedia. A special thank you to Milestone Melodies for our theme music. As you continue your day, what is one action that you can apply from this podcast to your life? Tune in for our next episode as we continue to challenge everyone to break average.